Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at Maureen and her horse Ringo. Ringo is an 8-year-old thoroughbred that she's been rehabbing. She's doing a pretty good job here of getting him moving forward and active. I'd like to see it maybe even a little bit more. I think you could ask for a little bit more out of him. So he just gets a little more swingy and just a little more active underneath himself. And as we can see, this horse is a typical thoroughbred. The kind that we see very often. He's a little inverted, that his neck looks like he's been pulling with his shoulders most of his life. His back is quite hollow. We can see there's a pretty good dip there behind the saddle. But she's getting him working better here, getting more active, beginning to soften in the bride a little bit. Her position looks good. Spurs are rather high. Just looking at you right away, I'd like to see those spurs. If you're going to use spurs for your leg there, they need to be much lower, because the way you have them on there, I fear that you would end up riding off of them all the time, because they look like they're a little high on your foot there and kind of sticking into his sides all the time. So I would put those much lower and be sure that you can control when you can use those spurs and when you don't. Other than that, position looks pretty good. I'd like to see you maybe lift your chest just a little bit more, but not bad at all. I'd say I'd just move those spurs down so they're not sticking in his side so much. And then try to make him a little more active. We want to think generally that the whip is what we use to reinforce the leg, and the spur becomes something that we use much later on. It looks to me like you're using your spur almost every time you use your leg here, and that's the danger with putting the spurs on this high as you have them and angled upwards like that. And so if it were me, I would take my spurs off on a horse like this and get them really sensitive to my leg moving forward, and then later on go back to the spur as a refinement of the leg. But, you know, this is certainly not bad. You're controlling it pretty good, but I would just take those off. Still, once again, here he could swing a little more actively forward. Not a bad downwards transition, a little stiff coming into it, but I wouldn't expect him to do much more than that, considering he wasn't that active and underneath himself yet. And not bad as she moves off. I like how she's not spending a lot of time in the sitting trot. Once again, one of the cardinal rules you must remember. Now he's starting to stretch much better. That's good. I see she tips over a little bit as he stretches down. Remember to try to keep yourself stretched up, but that's good. Now this is all really good. He just needs to be that little bit more active. So if you give him a little tap with your whip right here and get him swinging over his back, remember it's not enough just to stretch down. Very often horses will stretch down or even kind of out, but they're not really coming through. So that just facilitates the position that you want to get him through the back. But as soon as you can get him to lower his head and neck and swing, then you want to ask for a little bit more active. So that's the biggest thing I'd like to see here. And I'd like to see you beginning some lateral work at this point that is just simple from the center line, you know, leg yielding to the right and left, that sort of thing. Nothing too complicated till you get him a little more swinging over his back that is a little more consistent in the bridle. Now you had a really good stretch there, and word eye, that's really where you want to keep a horse like this. Remember, they're only going to develop muscle when they're in that long swinging position that lets them engage the whole length of their top line. So with him, I felt like it went pretty well there, but then you brought him on back up, and I would like to see him a lot lower and get a lot more active and get that step a lot longer, the stride a lot longer and active as you're going around there. So here he's kind of like midway there. It's not bad. Once again, I like how you're not interfering with your hands. You know, your balance looks pretty independent there. You know, you're not holding against your hands all the time, and that's the first step to going in the right direction here, is just not holding on to the horse's mouth. This is looking a little more active. So once again, I still like to see him stretching down. More like the position you had him earlier, but this is starting to look better. She's swinging here a little bit more actively. Head and neck is still a little too high for his level of development. As you can see, you can kind of look at that neck muscle and see how he kind of is holding that rigid there. That tells you he's pulling a little bit with his shoulders there and not quite over his back as completely as we'd like him to be. But it is getting better as she's going. The step is getting a little more active. So that's good. He's starting to have a little bit of thrust off the ground. Not much there yet, but certainly improving. And once again, I like the fact that you're keeping moving. You know, you're not spending a lot of time. As I say, this would be the kind of horse that doing a bunch of transitions like downwards to walk would not be helpful, because the horse isn't steady enough in the bridle yet to make that worthwhile. Not bad. I would like to see your canter transition not sit so much because that tends to hollow him. So if he doesn't get it right away, I'd come back at him swinging more active. Though there's not a bad flying change that she just did there. But once again, now here's a case of the horse. This horse is very hollow in the canter, head very high, not really moving through his back at all. So this is the kind of horse I would probably come back and do much more trot work, because this kind of canter is just really not going to help him. You're sitting up and kind of through his back. And we'd like to get him much longer and lower before we do much canter work. So now, however, the trot work is a little more active after the canter, just by virtue of getting him moving in the canter a bit. So that's a good thing. So she's come back to a better trot here after doing that canter work. But once again, when the horse is that hollow, you don't want to do much canter. It's not going to do him much good. So build the strength here in the trot, get him much more lower and more swinging. And try to start your canters even from the stretch. You know, you're starting with the horse in a very high position, so he doesn't have much chance of coming through his back there. And same thing here, he's just kind of cantering flat and hollow. Not anything you'd want to do a whole lot of at this point. Once again, if we can't get him over his back, we don't want to do a lot of cantering. And you can see how he's kind of losing his back out and out from underneath him here in the canter. He just really isn't strong enough to do a very good canter yet. So I do a lot more trot work with this horse, though. There it starts to swing a little more, making it more active, more like this as you get him to soften and stretch more into the contact. And I like how your canter didn't keep going for a really long time, so that's really good. Not a bad downwards transition there. I like how you kept your hands soft. You let him just step into the downwards transition, which is what we want. We never want to do anything abrupt. And here he comes back and begins to swing and stretch a little better here. There we go, down there. So I guess the thing I'd like to say here is I'd like to see this horse, you got him in a pretty good stretch in the trot, though it wasn't quite active enough in the beginning. So I think you could go back and do more of that, which she's going to do here. And that certainly looks better. So let's get back into this deeper stretch. There you go, like that. And now make him more active and getting more swinging and work in that for longer periods of time and start to add in your lateral work. Thank you so much for sending in this. I look forward to seeing another submission. A little more activity there, and it'll be good. Thank you so much for sending it in.